The Nintendo Switch 2 Direct is only a few days away, and there's no better time than now to get my thoughts and opinions out on what we will be seeing in this showcase. First and foremost, we already know what we are here for, and it's more information on the Nintendo Switch 2. I am fully expecting a 10 to 15 minute breakdown detailing the system specs and other achievements that differentiate it from the base Switch. The only thing I feel like we need to see is the main menu updated with themes and music that we've been missing since the 3DS and Wii U era. If we were to get no inclusion of any update to the main menu screen in terms of like customizability with like music and stuff, I would be very disappointed. Now, of course, we're more than likely to see a lot of news about the hardware for the system, but I'm in fact more interested about what games we can possibly see in the Direct. Now, we already had Metroid and Pokemon trailers in the surprise Direct we had last week, but I would bet money that we see versions of the games playing on the Switch 2 with better graphics and frame rate. Now, since we got that one nugget of information from Nintendo that there would be Nintendo Switch 2 versions of the games, I think it wouldn't be too crazy to see us getting upgrades for older games that run better, like Tears of the Kingdom, Animal Crossing New Horizons, and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Now, aside from those older games, I also think that we can possibly see a new Nintendo Switch Online perk being thrown in the mix somewhere. Perhaps Wii games being playable with Nintendo Switch Online, or even DS and GameCube games. I feel like this is a little harder to predict due to the fact that the closer that we get to the Wii U games, they might just want to re-release them in general rather than give them out in a subscription service. Let's go ahead and talk like games. The main driving point of this Direct. We very well could see only 2 or 3 new games since we had a Direct last week, but I genuinely think that we have much more in store. I believe the first 15 minutes of this Direct is going to be purely based on like the hardware of the console and like all the stuff that the console itself could do, but we're gonna get another 30 minutes just straight up games and all the stuff that we could be excited to play on this console, because let's be honest, we already know what the Switch 2 is. It's just another Switch, just souped up. More than likely some cool things to do with it, but it's still just a Switch. So there's not going to be that much more unless they really jam-packed that entire Direct with nothing but brand new hardware stuff, and there's like a lot of stuff to do with the Switch 2 in comparison to the base one. I highly doubt we're going to be spending more than 15 to 20 minutes on the Switch 2. So that being said, I do think we're going to get 30 minutes of gameplay, equaling out to around like 45 minutes to an hour of an entire presentation. I think we will see a healthy mix of first-party and third-party games to make up for the presentation that we had last week. Now, for the first game, I think that we will see, which is almost a guarantee, I think it's going to be Mario Kart 10 or 9 or whatever. We already saw it in the original trailer for the Switch 2, but I'm almost certain they will spend a good chunk of time demonstrating this game and all the new visuals and gameplay mechanics in it. Another game franchise I could see getting a new game is Kirby. I think it's been long enough since the last one that we got. I think something new with the new power of the Switch 2 would be very, very inviting. And Sakurai has even said that he was working on his next project already, so it would make sense for him to kind of usher in a brand new system with his own like child being Kirby. You know, it makes a lot of sense to me. And if it wasn't going to be Kirby, then I could definitely see us getting a Kid Icarus, but I know this might be a little bit like controversial, but I think we could definitely also see another Smash Brothers game coming in this Direct. Now, I don't know if it's going to be a brand new Smash Brothers game, but I could definitely see it being like Smash Deluxe of sorts, where they kind of put in all the DLC that we got in Smash Ultimate and just repackage it in one game, and it's all like $60 to $70 or whatever. And then they also end up throwing in a couple more new characters, or maybe even throwing in another Fighter's Pass, and that was what Sakurai was working on like a little bit, but then he has like another game, you know, that he was working on like full time, you know, but who knows, we'll just have to wait and see. Now, in terms of other games, I would definitely like to see a Switch 2 original IP, kind of like how we got ARMS, 1-2 Switch, and Astral Chain for the original Switch. I think there needs to be a game or franchise that can really set this console apart from the base Switch, and I think it needs to be its own, you know, Breath of the Wild. Whatever it will be, we'll probably have to wait and see. I don't know. I can't really predict what a game that we don't know exists yet is, but I could definitely see us getting something that's as big as a Zelda, maybe, or no, maybe not Zelda. That's probably stretching it a little bit, but maybe as big as an ARMS or an Astral Chain. Speaking of those Switch 1 debut games, I do think that it would make sense for us to get a sequel to them. I mean, it's been like 7 years since ARMS came out. I do think that it makes a lot of sense to see maybe an ARMS 2, maybe an Astral Chain 2. We already got a sequel to 1-2 Switch, which is kind of shadow dropped and kind of just thrown out there. I do wonder if it was meant to be a part of the Switch 2 Direct, or just like a part of the Switch 2 in general, but they were just like, you know what, this game is more than likely not going to do that well when the Switch 2 comes out because of all these other games, so we're just going to release it now in order for people to kind of have it. But I don't even know if it did well in general. I'd have to check, but I don't think it did. Of course, I do think third-party games will take a big spotlight in this presentation, however, just to highlight the Switch's power. I think we'll see games like Elden Ring on the Switch 2, along with like Marvel Rivals, all the newer MiHoYo games like Zenless Zone Zero and Genshin Impact, the Resident Evil 4 remake that we got, and then of course Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth. With these games coming to the Switch 2, which I do think is almost extremely likely, it would make the Switch 2 the most like appealing console on the market that is a hybrid. You know, even then, I do think that the Switch 2, with its gimmick of being a hybrid console, is already kind of interesting and appealing, but a lot of people don't really touch their Switch as much as they would want to, mainly because of the fact that it can't play a lot of the games that they really do want to play. If I can end up playing like Zelda on the go and then being like, you know what, I want to play the brand new Final Fantasy VII whatever the third one is, I could definitely see that being the case, especially with as strong as the Switch is supposedly going to end up being for the Switch 2. I could definitely see us getting a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth or Remake or whatever, and also just every other game. You know, I feel like a Monster Hunter Wilds is very, very likely. I honestly, actually, if anything, I could definitely see like our lineup for like launch year being Monster Hunter Wilds, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy 16 even, if they wanted to. I gotta see us getting all those fighting games like Tekken 8, Street Fighter 6, Grand Blue, although we might have already gotten Grand Blue. I don't know, I don't play it on the Switch. But regardless, I do think that we could eventually see a whole lot of like really high-end games that wouldn't originally run on the Switch. And of course, updated versions of games that ran like shit on the Switch, like a Mortal Kombat. And I also think that being able to play those games natively on the Switch would also make it worth the price point too, because a lot of these like hybrid consoles could play Final Fantasy VII, like Steam Deck and whatever, but their price is asking for a little bit, you know, it's asking for a lot, which I think is also a great segue into what the price of the console could be. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't really see this thing hitting over $450. I think $450 is like the absolute max for the console, and at the lowest, like $400, unless they make it a like digital only type of console, then I could see it being like a $375 like price point or somewhere around that. But I genuinely don't see it being any lower than $400. I think $400 is like the exact sweet spot they kind of need to land. Like it's $50 more expensive than the Switch OLED, and also gives them enough space to be like, hey look, if we want to do an upgrade for the console later on and give a Switch 2 OLED or something similar, it could just be $450 and it does not ever hit the $500 range, which I wouldn't be mad at a $500 Nintendo console, but if it's going to be like the Switch, I wouldn't necessarily be like super duper impressed with it. Now in terms of like the release date and like the launch window, I could definitely see it launching in June with Metroid Prime 4, like right alongside it. I think it makes a lot more sense to have a Metroid Prime 4 game being the launch game, especially since we had Breath of the Wild sort of being the launch game for the base Nintendo Switch. But besides that though, I do think we're gonna end up seeing all those other third-party games come out within like the first like week or two of the Switch 2 being out. It's really exciting to see that we're gonna get another brand new Nintendo console launch, like since we haven't had one in such a long time. I know it's only been like 7 years, but damn bro, 7 years kind of just flies by sometimes, you know. But yeah, I could definitely see Elden Ring popping up just like how Skyrim was for the base Switch. It kind of like, there's like a lot of parallels that I could definitely see happening. But yeah, other than that, I'm really excited. I really hope that this presentation does not blow. I do think that the reason that people weren't really a fan of what we got in the presentation last time was because this was like kind of just like a warm up for what we're gonna get. Now it may not be like the greatest thing ever, but I am expecting it to kind of blow my mind a little bit and make everybody sort of that were like on the fence on buying a Switch 2 sort of get off of that fence and be like, you know what, it is worth it to buy a Switch 2. Because as of right now, I have friends that are casual gamers that are like, I don't really see a reason in buying a new Switch. I'm still just now playing Animal Crossing because I just now got a Switch and I have not gotten to play any of that stuff, so I'm kind of fine on my Switch 1 because I haven't even really used it to its fullest capabilities. But I do hope that they end up having a good mix of, you know, the Switch 1 players and the Switch 2 players. I don't want to see just a bunch of games that can be played on the base Switch being shown at directs from now on. I do hope that they end up like just giving us a bunch of Switch 2 game, you know, they've already basically commented on, saying that, yeah, in order to make a lot of money on a new console, you need to kind of have console exclusives. So I'm not doubting that we will see those later on in the presentation, more than likely, but I am a little bit worried. But with that being said, that is going to be today's video. I hope you guys are excited for the Switch 2, because I know that I am. If you guys are planning on watching the direct, you know, consider watching it with me on stream or whatever. We're going to be there exactly at 5 o'clock in the morning. We're going to be live for like an hour until the presentation starts at 6 a.m. So with that being said, if you guys do want to go ahead and come check it out with me, either live or later on afterwards, feel free to do so. I will have the VOD posted like almost immediately after, because we're gonna be streaming on YouTube anyways, right? But with that being the case though, I will see you guys next time in the next video. Peace out.